It's August 7th, people. Yins know what that means. Happy birthday to Sidney Crosby. In today's episode, it's all about the Pittsburgh Penguins captain.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Tape. You can follow him on all social media platforms at Send and Verwet. You can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins, and you can find us on Instagram at LockedOn_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So, Pat, it's Thursday, August 7th, 8-7 day. You know what that means. Every Penguins fan knows what that means. Happy 38th birthday to Penguins captain Sidney Crosby. And yes, your reaction is my reaction as well, my friend. We are all getting very old. I still remember exactly where I was 20 years ago when he was drafted by the Penguins. How has it been 20 years? Time just continues to fly. And we're going to spend this first segment talking about what we expect out of Crosby this year. Because yes, he is in the back nine of his NHL career, but he is still one of the best players in the league, Pat. This past season, 33 goals, 91 points in 80 games, his third straight season of 90-plus points, despite being in his mid to late 30s. He had 93 in 22-23, 94 in 23-24, and then 91 this past year. In terms of this upcoming season, even though he's going to be 38, why not in terms of having a fourth straight 90-plus point season? I think he can do it, especially if he continues to have very good wingers, and we expect that just because he always gets the first choosings when it comes to the top wingers on the team. Sorry, Gino, we still love you, but that's just how it's been throughout their careers usually. Right now, they still have Brian Rust, Rickard Rakell on the team. If one or both of those players are still Penguins by the time the regular season comes around, he's going to put up points, especially with those two, because he loves playing with those two, specifically Brian Rust. Those two very much have been like this ever since Rust came into the league. You look at some of the records that Crosby is chasing this year. One in particular, Pat, the franchise's all-time points record set by Mario Lemieux. Crosby only needs 36 points to tie Lemieux with 1,723 points. 37 to break it. He stays healthy. He is 1,000,000% breaking that record this year, and that is a record that is going to be in place for a very long time, if not ever, though I think a lot of Penguins fans felt like Mario's record was going to be in place forever until Sid came along and he's about to break it. So at the very least, it's going to be his record for a while, if not ever, and he's going to keep climbing the ranks in terms of the NHL's all-time points list. So, Pat, what are your expectations for Crosby this upcoming season?
Really about the same as they were this past season, because you look at what he has done since turning 30. He has hovered over a point per game every single year. If you go from 30 to 37, which his 30-year-old season was 2017-2018, 1.09 points per game. Age 31 season, 1.27, 32, 1.15, 33, 1.13, 34, 1.22, 35, 1.13, 36, 1.15, 37, 1.14. So just a ridiculous model of consistency. And it comes back to the thing I have been saying about Crosby quite a lot, and I know I'm not alone in this. I don't really ever see a cliff coming for Sidney Crosby. His game is going to deteriorate the older that he gets. He'll have games and stretches where, yeah, he's not quite Sidney Crosby anymore, but I don't ever foresee him becoming, I don't want to say a liability, but I think until he decides to hang them up, he will always be a top 6 forward in some capacity. So I look at this season, and like you said, he's chasing the franchise lead in points. We're probably going to be talking about that at the end of November. We're probably going to have to come on here, do a show, and talk about in late November or mid-December, in that range, he is going to take over the franchise lead in points. I can see him having another 90-point season. If not 90, it's going to be around that. It's going to be mid 80s to 90s. I see him having that kind of season this year. And the other thing I'm curious to see, and I think this is going to really give us an idea of where Sidney Crosby's game as he enters his age 38 season. I don't know how long Brian Rust and Rickard Rakell are going to remain Penguins through this year. I would say it's more likely Rust is going to be a Penguin until he decides he doesn't want to be one anymore. Rickard Rakell, I see him at some point this season getting dealt. So you know that Crosby eventually is going to get paired up or completely surrounded by the young talent. How does he elevate those players? Because we make the jokes, we talk about it all the time. Oh, he was great with Pascal Dupuis. Who was Pascal Dupuis? He elevated Chris Kunitz. Who was Chris Kunitz? He got end of the career Billy Guerin, who wasn't Billy Guerin anymore. He was just a guy who had and the thing they all had in common was the ability to play with elite talent, which is, I always say, a talent in and of itself. You have to know how to play with elite talent. We've seen plenty of players who can't. But when these young guys are on his wing, can they keep up with him, and can Crosby elevate them? That'll really tell us, in my estimation, not how much does he have left in the tank, but how much is he still Sidney Crosby?
That's fair. I mean, he did spend quite a bit of last season with both Rust and Rakell, though sometimes Sullivan would split one of those two wingers up from Sid and then move one of them down, to play with Malkin and stuff like that. Obviously, you saw Sid play with Koivunen and McGroarty a little bit down the stretch. In my opinion, I think he's a bit of a better fit with McGroarty, and I'm curious to see if Dan Muse decides to tinker with that at the start of the season, just considering the chemistry that they had. And I think McGroarty is the type of player that works really well with Sid. And we all know how great of a leader he is, both on and off the ice. I think that will be very valuable to someone like a McGroarty, who will be entering his first full NHL season. You'll say the same thing about Koivunen, who we expect on the team as well. So I expect that to continue for this upcoming season. Points-wise, I'm right there with you. 80 to 90 plus points. I would love it if he hit 100, but I think right now that's a little bit more unlikely, not trying to rain on anyone's parade or anything like that. But I think just with where he is age-wise, I think if you're around that 80 to 90 point range, anyone should take that. But I do think he's going to continue his point per game streak this year. But I do think you're also going to see.
I'll say this about 100 points. I don't think, and this is going to sound very riding the fence, not taking a position, but I think it's a possibility. But if only this were a better team.
That's fair.
Because if it was a better team, you'd have a better power play. You'd have more competitive games where he'd be called upon to do more and things like that. There's going to be nights where they're down 2-1, 3-1, and it wouldn't shock me if Muse is like, just, we don't need to put the top 6 out there. Just hang out. They're not going to get power plays. If this was a team that was contending for the playoffs, I'm not saying I would expect him to get 100 points, but I would certainly expect him to flirt with it.
Well, just to play devil's advocate, a little bit, that power play was basically top 5 last year. It was one of the best power plays in the league. So I will push back a little bit on that. So he will
but I'll say it from this perspective. If you remember the 16 and 17 Penguins, the reason they were obviously was the talent was why they were so good on the power play, but they were such a fast, competitive, talented team. They drew a lot of penalties.
That's fair.
I don't think this Penguins team is going to draw a lot of penalties. So they might do well with what they get, but getting more opportunities because they're just better and faster than a team, I don't see that happening.
That's also fair just because they are not close to being one of the fastest teams in the league. You look at a team like the Devils, for example, when they're fully healthy, that's one of the fastest teams in the league. And we've seen them give the Penguins numerous fits over these last several years, whether it's in Pittsburgh or whether it's in Newark. But yeah, I hear you a bit on a couple of the other things as well, but that'll also do it for the first segment here. Coming up in the second and the third segments, Pat and I are just going to wax poetic about Crosby, go into our favorite moments throughout his 20-year tenure with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and that's coming up right after this. However, before we get to that, we have to tell you all about our first sponsor, and that is FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. The app, it's very easy to use, very fast to pay out. It makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether I'm placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet ride into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I am part of the action. If you are new to FanDuel, new customers can get bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Pat Stamp. And Pat wrote a really cool feature today for the Hockey News, just going into 5 of Crosby's many great moments for the Pittsburgh Penguins over the years. I didn't want to include any international stuff on there just because I will be a very salty American. I don't want to include the Team Canada gold medal clinching goal against the United States in 2010. I'm sorry. I just really did not want to do that just because even though it's been 15 years, still wish the U.S. would have won that game, even though it was an iconic moment for Sid and company. What a game that was.
Can I tell a story about that game? Can I tell a story about that game? So that was 2010. That was the 09-10 season.
Yeah.
That was also my freshman year of college. It was my first year playing on IUP's hockey team. And we all piled into one of our teammates' apartments to watch the game. And I believe, if my memory serves, I think our roster was 23 or 24 players. And there were maybe 16 or 17 of us in this little apartment watching the game. And let's just, for sake of argument, say it was 16 of us. 15 of us are Americans. One of us is Canadian. When the Americans tied it up late in the third, we went bonkers. We went nuts. And then in overtime, when Sid scores, one person went nuts, and you could hear a pin drop in that apartment. And there were, in IUP's demographic and makeup of where people came from, for a weird reason, I don't know if it's still this way, I haven't been there in years. When I was there, it was like 50-50 Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. So like half of us were like, yeah, this sucks, but at least it was Sid. And then the other half were like, this guy tortures me everywhere.
Well, I don't think I can beat that story. It's funny. I was watching the game with my mom and my stepdad. My stepdad is sadly a Capitals fan, a big yikes for that one. My mom, of course, she's the reason I'm into hockey. She's been a fan of this team since before I was born. And when Sid scored, we kind of just looked at each other and kind of just said, are we like, we were mad, but we were like, man, this is one of the first times we've ever had to root against Sidney Crosby. It was just such an awkward moment because obviously we were stunned, but we were also just like, wow. So now we kind of know how it feels for these other fan bases where Sid just torches them on a nightly basis. So that part of it was a bit funny. But in terms of Penguin specific moments, I have to start with the quote unquote goal, Game 4, 2009 Stanley Cup final. Evgeny Malkin, if at first you don't succeed, try again with that pass. He misses the first one, gets the puck back, sends it cross ice to Crosby, who absolutely gets mobbed by both Malkin and Letang, sends Mellon Arena into a frenzy. And I've told this on the show before, but I really think that goal, which ended up being the game winner in game 4. It made it 3-2. The Penguins made it 4-2 a little bit later to tie up the series at 2 against the Red Wings in the 2009 final. I really think that goal, at least for me, put a thought in my head. And I think for a lot of other fans as well, that they can beat this team. Like, this actually might be different, because when you compare that final to 2008, it was going the same way, Pat. Red Wings won the first 2 games. Penguins struck back in game 3, but you have to find a way to win game 4. The Red Wings won game 4 in 2008, took a 3-1 series lead. They win that series in 6 games. This one, Penguins, they want to win this Stanley Cup. You got to find a way to tie up this series at 2, going back to Joe Louis Arena in 2009. Sure enough, they did. Jordan Staal, with one of the biggest goals of that final and of that playoff run, ties it at 2. And then Crosby gets the goal, just an unreal goal between him and Malkin to make it 3-2. And I don't think that goal gets talked about enough when it comes to Crosby's career, but I wanted to start out with it just because of how huge of a moment it was when the Penguins were chasing their first cup of the Crosby era.
It showed, because we kind of forget how early in Crosby's career this was.
Yeah.
This was his 4th season in the league, because if you go through his career, first season they missed the playoffs, second year they get humbled by Ottawa, third year they make that crazy run to the 2008 final and then run into a juggernaut of a Red Wings team. So this is year 4 of Crosby's career.
Yeah.
And it really showed us that we knew, just in the way he played, that he had that clutch gene in him, that in the biggest moments he rises to the occasion. And I won't say, because we were not at all looking at that 2009 playoff thinking, oh my God, when is Sid going to show up? Because he was great throughout that whole run, but you were waiting for that moment in the Stanley Cup final, right? You were waiting for the moment for Sid, and that was it. And to your point, you look at the way how closely mirrored those 2 finals were. Yeah, as a fan, we go into 2009 thinking, of course, we're in the Stanley Cup final. We're one of 2 teams. We either win or we don't. Of course, we got a chance to win the Stanley Cup. But in your head, you're like, dude, it is Detroit. It is the Detroit Red Wings. Like, this is going to be a difficult lift. You mix together Stahl's shorthanded goal and then that moment, in that, like you, I looked at that, and that was the first moment in that final where I went, yeah, like, there's a real possibility they could do this. Because you look at the 2008 final, great story. They had some moments, but you went, man, this one isn't really in doubt. Like, they're going to put up a fight, but we know who's coming out on top. After those 2 goals, you went, they got a shot.
And sure enough, we were proven right, because the Penguins won that series in 7 games in 2009 against the Red Wings. But yeah, I mean, again, like, Mellon Arena went into quite a frenzy. Remember, the Red Wings actually called timeout after that Crosby goal, and you could just see, like, the camera panning to everyone in the crowd. They're going nuts. It pans to the owner's box with Mario up there just smiling with his wife. You see the watch parties outside the igloo with people have, like, the fake Stanley Cups in the air. Like, it was such an awesome time, and you could just see the belief in all of the fans who were in the arena that night, at least when I was watching TV, when I was only, 11, I was going to turn 12 later that year. So again, one of my favorite moments. And then, of course, Pat, before we get to the final segment where we continue discussing more great moments, poor Jason Spezza, Penguins assistant general manager Jason Spezza, former Ottawa Senator Jason Spezza, who got turned into an absolute pylon behind the net in the 2010 series between the Penguins and the Senators. Crosby went to work on him down low, goes back to the point. Chris Letang gets the game-winning goal. Just another vintage Sid moment. There was nothing Spezza could have done about that. I'm sure once he got hired here as an assistant GM, Sid probably went up to him and was like, hey, remember what happened back in 2010? So still, that moment, it still will forever live rent-free in my head.
It's so perfect. It's such a perfect encapsulation of what makes and what has made Sidney Crosby such an elite talent in the NHL. And I real quick, I got to give a shout out to a lot of people who commented, shared, and watched my clip from a couple weeks ago about the youth hockey stuff. To relate those two together in a way, if you are any sort of hockey coach at any level, you need to evaluate and show that clip to players, because it is a perfect model. Obviously, don't expect your players to do that. They're not Sidney Crosby. Not many people are, but it shows how good his puck control, puck protection, edge work, and power are, because he puts it all together in that moment. He owns the puck. He protects it extremely well against the defender in so much of it. If you guys who are listening to this, you're all sickos just like we are. So you know exactly what clip we're talking about. Forget about the crowd swelling. Forget about what Jason Spezza is doing to try to get the puck off of Sid. Just watch Sid's skates and watch the way he positions his feet, the way he positions his body. It is an absolute masterclass in edge work and puck protection.
Oh, 100%. Like the way that he was able to spin off Spezza multiple times, still get the puck back to the point, even while falling to his knees before Letang rifles it for the game-winning goal to tie up that series at 1 apiece against Senators. Flawless stuff from the captain. But that'll do it for the second segment. Coming up to end the show, as I said, we're going to continue to remember some of Sidney Crosby's finest moments so far with the Penguins, and that's coming up right after this. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Naaman. Pat, I've gone into a couple of my favorite memories when it comes to Sidney Crosby. Let's hear a couple of yours now.
One of, and I've had to do so much reading this week, both for the show and for work. So I think Josh, our good pal Jocho, he put this in his top Crosby goals, because this week's been going crazy for me. So apologies to Josh, but I think he had this ranked as his number one, and it's probably my number one too. It's the F yeah goal against the Islanders at then Consol Energy Center, because again, very similar to when we look back at the 2009 Stanley Cup, we've kind of, I don't want to say forgotten, but it's been a little bit lost about how close we were to seeing Crosby's greatness cut short because of the concussion and the neck issues that he had in the early 2010s after the 2011 Winter Classic. And it was daily updates. Crosby skated, but only for like 10 minutes. Crosby didn't skate today. Crosby skated today, but it was only for 5 minutes. And then you had that weird press conference where he had to push back on rumors that he was retiring, and we were all just counting down the days. And even though we didn't know when the end was, when Crosby would return to action. And then that day in November against the Islanders, it goes from just a random early season game against the Islanders to the biggest game on the hockey calendar. Everyone was at this game. Every outlet. TSN, Sportsnet, RDA, ESPN, everybody was at this game because Crosby came back. And not only does he come back, his second shift, he does the most Sidney Crosby thing imaginable on his second shift. Makes a play in the defensive zone behind the net to break up an Islanders attack, immediately heads up ice, gets a pass, beats a defenseman wide, scores on his backhand because of course he does, and just lets the cap off. Because for basically a year and a half, false starts, rumors about his retirement, injury troubles, I'm sure he had some absolutely brutal days, because if you've even had a minor concussion, they suck. But the fact that he had a concussion and neck issues, finally gets to come back and scores an unbelievable goal in Consol Energy Center, just erupts. And for my money, along with the significance of Crosby being back after all that time away, what made this goal so huge was it was the first moment at Consol Energy Center, because that initial season, they're doing well. They're playing well. Crosby goes on that crazy point streak. Because remember, this is only the second season of Consol Energy Center. And by the time the playoffs show up for the first season of Consol Energy Center, Crosby's got the concussion issues. Malkin's out with a knee injury. They go 7 with Tampa, but it's a pretty forgettable series. So this was the first big moment in that arena. So it was really, really cool to see.
I remember exactly where I was for that too. I was actually getting ready for practice. I could not watch the entire game, but thankfully he scored early enough where I just let out a huge scream. My mom was so excited. I think I wouldn't say I woke up because it was still early enough where everyone was up, but I think everyone heard my scream all the way down my street in my neighborhood. And I went to practice with the biggest smile on my face because it was just so awesome seeing him back for just that game and just in general because it had been so long. So I love that goal. You're right. F yeah, because he just let it all out. Another one, speaking of the Islanders, because he has torched the Islanders so much throughout his career, the time, Pat, where he comes back from the broken jaw, Game 5, 2013, splits the defenseman, shades of Mario, by the way, and beats Evgeny Nabokov, blocker side, and the whole arena just went nuts. He has that little weird visor. It's not like a full face shield, but it's like a half a face shield just because he's protecting his broken jaw. He had just come back a few games ago, and that arena went nuts. Like it had still been pretty new as an arena, but that's probably the loudest that I had heard PPG since it opened after they stopped playing at Mellon Arena. And it was such a big moment too, because the Penguins had just choked in Game 4 and they were up 2-0 before Crosby made it 3-0. But it was still so huge because that was the goal that really, at least to me, clinched them that game. And I think gave them the confidence to go win that series in 6 games on the island against, I would say, their biggest nemesis throughout this franchise history. When you look at what's gone on in the playoff failures, when you look at that. So that gave them the confidence to go to the island and beat them in 6 games. But that goal still one of my favorites to this day.
It's up there for me, just the way he bounces off a defender, and just every play-by-play person, and us too, loves to use the phrase buries it, but that goal was the definition of burying it.
Yeah.
Because he blew that puck by the goaltender, and it was an unreal shot. The next one for me isn't really a moment, but it's a run. And it's from the end of the 2015 playoffs until the Penguins win the Stanley Cup in 2017 for the second straight year, because there were never any doubts that he was going to go down as one of the greatest players to ever play the game. But when you look at his run from the time they exit the 2015 playoffs to when they beat Nashville to go back to back, it was an unbelievable performance for Crosby in those times. He comes back and he struggles to start the 15-16 season, but the entire team does. Mike Johnston gets canned, Mike Sullivan comes in, and a rocket gets strapped to this franchise's back. And Crosby is a huge catalyst for it. He absolutely goes off from December till the playoffs. He gets back-to-back Conn Smythe trophies as a result, wins a Rocket Richard. He wins the 2016 World Cup of Hockey, and in the World Cup, he is not even close to anybody else. He was the best player in that tournament, and whoever you want to say was second, they were a distant second. And in that run, he, to me, not just because of the Stanley Cups, not just because of the Conn Smythe trophies, he solidifies himself as a top 5 player all time, just because you couldn't touch him in that time period. He was head and shoulders, no questions asked, the best player on the planet. And yes, the HBK line, the rise of Matt Murray, Marc-Andre Fleury's swan song, Phil Kessel, Mike Sullivan, all the heroes that helped them win those 2 cups. Yeah, they played a role, but none of it happens without the performance of the captain. He strapped that team to his back, and he got some help carrying the load, but for the majority of that 2-ish year period, it was Crosby and everybody else.
Best player on the planet, 1,000,000%. And even to this day now, still a top 5, top 10 player in the world, even though he is 38 now. And this past season, Pat, when you look at international, Four Nations face-off, he goes in. It is clear that he is banged up. He's one of Canada's best players during that event, and it wasn't even close. Even though they had Cale Makar, Nathan McKinnon, Connor McDavid, etc., Crosby was still one of Canada's best players during that tournament, and I would expect it to be the case when he goes back to the Olympics and tries to captain Team Canada to yet another gold medal. But that will do it for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to / watch this one. Pat and I will be back with another episode for you guys on Friday, continuing A, Fan Take Friday, and B, our top 25 of the last 25 years. Pat, we have a pretty fun category for tomorrow, so that'll just be the tease for Friday's episode. But again, happy birthday, Sid. 38. It's crazy that it's been already 20 years, and we hope that you have another great season this year. So for Patrick Damp, I'm Hunter Hodes. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We appreciate it. We'll be back on Friday.